Is Pat here? There he is. You said that, talked about how long ago you were baptized. You're just a baby when I look at you. I've been a Christian for 42 years. Been married for 38 years. Became a Christian at 5 and was married at 7. So, if you want to know that. But anyway, it's definitely great to be a disciple of Jesus. I have, as I said, married for 38 years. I have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and 3 grandchildren. So it's not only is it fun to be a disciple, it's fun to be a grandpa. I've been working in and out of the nonprofit and for-profit sector for all my life. I started in the corporate world and then went to the nonprofit, went back to semi-nonprofit, and but for the last 10 years, I've been working at Habitat for Humanity as the international CFO. Habitat operates in about 70 countries, and every day builds 1,600 homes somewhere around the world. It's a great organization to work for, and as some of you were mentioning, it's also a good organization if you want to partner with. They have a lot of local chapters and local affiliates. One of the things that Habitat is very strong in is the idea of not creating dependency but giving dignity. And I'm excited. About a year ago, I left Habitat and started working for Hope Worldwide, and I'm the COO of Hope, working with Robert and Keith and others. And it's been a real joy to be able to really look at and look at programs and how can we develop programs that do just that. They don't give a handout, they give a hand up. And how to help, starting with our brothers and sisters, be self-sustaining. And starting with our brothers and sisters, for us to be able to say, around the world, we have no needy among us. Right now we do. But what do? We have enough money in this country to feed everybody, all of our brothers and sisters. We could easily do that every day. But then we're creating dependency on them. So instead, what can we do? What kind of training can we give to help them get out of poverty? To help them be able to contribute to their local church so that their local church can handle the benevolent needs within the local church. So I'm excited about what we're doing there, and certainly everything that we do at Hope, there's a strong component of godly justice or justice. In the slide behind me, who knows what that Hebrew word is? Kind of. The word is mishpat. And mishpat means justice. And anytime that you see justice, particularly in the Old Testament, most of the verses relate to mishpat. And we're going to talk about mishpat. But first, I want to just throw out some statements. I don't throw this out to offend anybody, but this is what brothers and sisters are talking about, sort of on the down low. So not paying employees enough to live on is unethical and immoral. Minimum wage should be at least $15 an hour. The Russia investigation that's going on right now is a witch hunt and is immoral. Israel is committing human rights violations against the Palestinians. One-state policy is immoral, unethical, should be stopped. Business owners have the right to refuse service to any group, LGBT, race, or any people they choose, if the group represents people who believe or live against the business owner's value. It's a moral right for everyone living in the United States, everyone that is living in the United States right now to have access to excellent health care. Climate change and the fossil fuels Green New Deal is an abomination. Ridiculous. There is no climate change. Gun control is out of control. Heavy restrictions should be made on how many guns each individual has. Probably we should just get rid of guns in this country. And having a wall is crucial to our security as a country. A woman's right to an abortion is a sacred decision that must be maintained at all costs. You could probably get behind one of those. And probably a lot of our brothers and sisters are getting behind a lot of these. And then there are other brothers and sisters that are getting behind other ones. And so what we end up doing is we end up offending one another. And then we sit down in a chair or in a pew and we take communion with each other. Now, selling a human being, we're all for that. Should be out. We should stop trafficking. We should stop any kind of abuse of children. If you steal from a widow, you should be penalized heavily. We can all agree on those things. But, and most of us would agree if there's force or fraud used to exploit the vulnerable. Within us, we carry an innate sense of right and wrong and of internal conviction. God has put in all humans a sense of right or wrong. And what we want with that sense of right or wrong, we want justice. Justice in its simplest form means to set things right. Yet, how do you know what's right? Which of those statements I just said were right? Some of the group would say, well, this one, this, and this, and others in the group would go, oh, this one, this one, this one. How do we define what's right? How do we define what's moral? You hear that a lot. This is moral, this is immoral, so who's defining that? Who defines what fair is? What is fair? Is the society at large? Right now, society is determining what's fair. And to some groups, one thing is fair. To other groups, another thing is fair. Is there a standard moral law that we all inherently know to follow? Or are we just listening to the world's view of social justice instead of what I want to talk about now is godly justice? I'm going to talk about four things. How do you define social justice from a biblical perspective? Jesus' teaching on social justice. The Israelite nation and how when the Israelites were getting the law, when they were wandering in the wilderness, and Moses would sit in a tent of meetings and would receive input from God. And thus we have the book of Exodus and the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Leviticus, all that have how the Israelites were to live as a new nation. Defining social justice, there's a to define justice in Hebrew terms, the word that we saw, mishpat, is so deep. The English language and the Greek language doesn't get anywhere near defining what justice is. This is an example of justice from Jesus. Turn to Luke chapter 10, verse 30 through 37. Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man, the higher class person, a Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed by him. A temple assistant walked over, looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion on him. A root word that is mishpat, compassion. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, "Take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time." Now, which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by the bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said, "Yes, now go and do the same." The Good Samaritan gave what he could to help the man. He practiced the Hebrew word for mishpat. So if you first want to understand what is justice to God, this is an epitome of justice that God puts out. Not that the Samaritan ran around trying to find the person, led the guy laying there and tried to find the person that hit him, or trying to find the bandits and put him in jail. The justice that he performed was he saw a need, he had compassion, and he met that need. First, he assisted personally. He saw the man lying on the road, and he bandaged his wounds. I'm sure he doesn't carry, a first aid kit with him back then. I don't know how he did that. Might probably use some of his own clothing. And bandaged the guy's wounds. I bet the guy would flip if he knew that a Samaritan was bandaging his wounds. Anyway, he first provided personally and directly, even when there was a cross-cultural difference. And he didn't let his prejudice, or the prejudice of perhaps the person who was assailed, he didn't let that keep him from providing mishpat. Second, rendering assistance. The Samaritan was going somewhere. He had obligations. He had to go. So after he personally took care of this man, he gave money and said, "Here, innkeeper, finish it up for me. And by the way, if you need more, I'll give it to you." That is mishpat. That is Jesus' unique, very compact version of godly mishpat. Justice defined in the Old Testament. And here's let's go over again. Okay, we'll go to the 3rd slide. Perfect. Justice defined in the Old Testament. We're going to talk about 3 Hebrew words. Mishpat, justice. Tzedakah, which means righteousness. And shalom, which is ultimate peace, ultimate wholeness. How did God set up mishpat for the Israelites? Well, mishpat is used over 420 times in the Hebrew Bible. The Greek translation, the Hebrew and the English translation doesn't come anywhere near what the true meaning is. Mishpat is at the core, the very core of God's heart. This is who God is, mishpat. I want to share with you a way that God defined mishpat when he was setting up the Israelite nation. Turn to Deuteronomy 15. Deuteronomy 15, verses 1 through 11. He's talking about how the Israelites are supposed to take care of one another. And the Israelites didn't just have Jewish people, they had aliens, they had others that weren't part of the Jewish nation, but they were within the Jewish nation. And in verse 4, he said, "There should be no poor among you, for the Lord your God will greatly bless you in the land he's giving you as a special possession." So what he's saying is, You will be blessed financially, so there should be no poor among you. Think about that with our brothers and sisters right now as we sit in Asia, in Central and South America, in Africa. How many of our brothers and sisters are in need? And how much have we been blessed in this country? 1 and 1 is not equal to 2 right now. There should be no poor among you, for the Lord your God will greatly bless you in the land he is giving you as a special possession. You will receive this blessing if you're careful to obey all the commands of the Lord your God that I'm giving you today. The Lord your God will bless you as he has promised. You will lend money to many nations, but will never need to borrow. You will rule many nations, but they will not rule over you. He's giving them the vision of what the Israelite nation, this new nation that just escaped from Pharaoh's grasp, that crossed the Red Sea, and that was living in the desert, and God was giving the Israelites the architecture of how they are supposed to live. Write down these scriptures. You can look at them later. Deuteronomy 14, 28 and 29. Leviticus 9, 9 through 10. Exodus 23, 10 through 12. These are sample scriptures that when you read them, God is setting up his own social security system for the Israelites and for everyone living in that nation. He says, do not gather the edges of your crops. Do not glean. Leave the edges of your crops so that the poor, the widows, the orphans, the aliens have something to eat. You're supposed to tithe 10%, and that goes to every year, and that goes to the Levites. And the Levites, that's to pay for them, for the temple costs, and for the poor treasury. Every 3 years, you're supposed to bring your entire tithe to offer to the poor. Every 7 years, whatever debt whatever somebody owes you, you're supposed to forgive it. And if somebody tries to borrow from you in the 6th year, knowing the 7th year is going to be forgiven, you should not withhold that. You should not give to that person that's borrowing. Every 7 years, now remember, this is an agrarian society. This is how they made their living. Every 7 years, you take all of the crops and you give it to the poor. All of your crops. All of your, what you've grown. And give it to the poor. God said if the Israelites would have followed that, there would have been no poor among them. Again, this is God's mishpat. The idea that we're all together, we're living together, we're taking care of one another. By saying that, obviously people had fields. So it's not that everybody made the same income, but those that had the fields were to be generous to those who had nothing. So that's mishpat from Jesus' perspective. That's mishpat from in the Old Testament where God set up a social security system. How about, fourthly, mishpat and righteousness? And I did a lot of study on this because this might be controversial, might not. By the way, I'm living temporarily in San Diego, but I go to the North River Church in Atlanta, and Tom Brown and Jeff Hickman and Matt Cheer and their wives are amazing. Thank you for just generously giving them to us, or ungenerously, I don't know, but. So anyway, I sent my notes to Tom and Jeff, and I said, if I get kicked out of California, then could I still come back to North River? And they said, yeah. Obviously, we have to have a strong concern for the poor. But there's so much more in mishpat than just in the definition of justice. We get more insight when we look at a second Hebrew word that can be related as being just, though it's usually translated being righteous, and that's the word tzedakah. Tzedakah is righteous, but that the righteous term in tzedakah means if you are being right, if each individual is being righteous, then there would be no need for mishpat. So righteous is your personal living the life of mishpat. When most modern people see the word righteousness in the Bible, you think of terms of private morality. Yes, I'm living a very moral life. My sexual purity is very good. I'm diligent in my prayer and my Bible study, and so I'm approaching righteousness. But in the Bible, tzedakah refers to day-to-day living in which a person conducts all relationships in family and society with fairness, generosity, and equity. It's not surprising then that most of the time that you see mishpat, you see tzedakah. Why is that? A quote from Timothy Keller, these two words roughly correspond to what some have called primary and rectifying justice. Rectifying justice is mishpat. It means punishing wrongdoers, caring for the victims of unjust treatment. Primary justice, or tzedakah, is behavior that, if it was prevalent in the world, it would render rectifying justice unnecessary because everyone would be living in the right relationship to everyone else. Therefore, though tzedakah is primarily about being in a right relationship with God, the righteous life that results is profoundly social. If you read Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46, sounds like it was discussed last night, the sheep and the goats. You know, when you read that and it's a salvation passage for sure, but okay, we don't tend to follow that or think about that or talk about that as much. We talk a whole lot more about Matthew 28 than we talk about Matthew 25, about the sheep and the goats. And if you think about it, if mishpat and tzedakah are usually used together, and if you can't have one without the other, then you can't be righteous without showing mishpat. And it's interesting, if you look in the Matthew 25 scripture, the sheep said, well, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you thirsty? You know, if you do something enough, it becomes second nature and you don't even realize you're doing it. If you're practicing mishpat day after day after day after day, you don't even realize how many people you've helped or served. And so I think with these people, the sheep, they've been practicing mishpat every day in their life. And so they don't, when did I see you hungry? I don't remember. I might have opened the door for 10,000 people in my life. I don't remember helping you in. And if we end up practicing mishpat and shudakah, we end up with shalom. Shalom is peace. It's what God has designed from the very beginning, that we flourish in all dimensions. Adam and Eve, before the sin, were in shalom. They were in paradise. They had no needs. Everything was cool with them. And that's what happens when we as a people practice mishpat and tzedakah. In closing, Exodus 23, verses 1 through 2. Actually, 1 through 3. You must not pass along false rumors. You must not cooperate with evil people by lying on the witness stand. You must not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you're called to testify in a dispute, do not be swayed by the crowd to twist justice, and do not slant your testimony in favor of a person just because that person is poor. What's Moses telling the Israelites? He's saying, don't use the outside society to determine what is truth, what is right, what is godly, what is moral, what is an abomination. Don't get on the social bandwagon. What we need to do is think it through. Just because all these people believe it and you see all this on the news, should I really get behind this? So, the question might be, can I march against injustice? Or should I post my viewpoints on social media? Or should our church organize an anti-abortion protest and all go and protest? Well, I don't know. I do know that we should not protest anything, or we should not be for anything that is unbiblical. And so before you have a strong desire on something or a strong conviction socially, make sure that conviction is biblical. And if you're not sure, you better read it out before you start going for it. Mishpat has to do with justice. So how do you respond with people that have different views? In the church, in our churches, in a lot of ways, we're no different than the rest of the world in this. We have our views, we have our opinions. I see so much unfortunate junk back and forth on social media from disciples. We should be able to talk. I should be able to talk about Black Lives Matter as a white man to an African American brother or sister and not get angry and not get mad. I should talk because I want to understand and he or she wants to understand. And there's no reason at all. If we are practicing mishpat in our lives, we are not going to get angry with our brothers, sisters, or anyone else. You know, a passage that's powerful is 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 6. Talks about praying, interceding for your leaders, and give thanks for them. That's every leader. If you're praying for them and giving thanks, can you then spew vitriol at them? That's not justice. That's unspirituality. But you know what I think the greatest injustice is? We have billionaires that hardly give any money to the poor. That's terrible. They've been blessed with success, but they don't really offer much because they probably think, well, it was all me. I made it. I did it. No idea that, no, God happened to allow you to be a billionaire. Or how about rulers taking bribes? That's an injustice. They've been given the trust of the people to have political power, and now they take bribes. That is a terrible injustice. Or a person in power exerting power over the weaker, like we've seen in Hollywood, and like we've seen so many places with the Me Too movement. That's terrible. That is an injustice. But I think one of the greatest injustices is when a person that has knowledge of the one true God, a person that has experienced his blessings, his love, experienced his grace, even though they're sinners, they still experience his grace, and not using words, actions, and energy to practice mishpat. When we, if we're disciples of Jesus, we have received the greatest gift of mishpat. God's Son, who was perfect, was unjustly crucified so you and me can go to heaven. And we know that, and we don't live it every day by sharing, by doing, by thinking, by praying, and helping other people that don't know that, isn't that an injustice? When you have something that is so valuable and you don't share it. Let's start there. Let's start there with our lives, to really think about practicing mishpat in our life, in our personal life. And then whatever concerns you have beyond that, whatever compassion, whatever convictions you have, I think we're free to do, we're much freer in this country than maybe we are in others to protest, and that's fine. But let's make sure that if you protest, you're living mishpat, you're praying for your leaders, you're praying for those that are in authority, and let's have conversations and let's learn the issues and share the issues, but in a way that God would be proud of us. Yeah. And not in a way of the world, in anger and just shutting down and not talking about it. We need to talk about these things in our church. They're important. But if we can't talk about them using mishpat, then we're not being the kind of disciples, I think, that God wants us to be. Why does God love justice and righteousness? Again, because mishpat plus tzedakah equals shalom. And God wants us to experience shalom. Thanks.